All right, good afternoon, everybody. Glad to be with you today. I want to thank Tracy Soto and Matthew Morrison and everyone at the Trinity River Library for the invitation to talk with you. I'm Jim Baxter. I'm the Assistant Director of Library Services on the Northwest Campus. I've been an academic librarian for 23 years. Before I got my master's degree, I earned a bachelor's degree in journalism, and I worked in newspapers and publishing for 10 years as a writer and copy editor. Anytime I get the chance to work with students on the subjects of fake news and information evaluation, I'm very glad to do so because it's an important issue facing all of us. Thanks to the internet, we are living in the most complicated information environment in history. The internet presents us with an endless supply of information. The amount is not the problem. It's often the quality or lack of quality that trips us up. Many of us don't know how to adequately analyze online information. We don't know the right questions to ask. And the ease of finding information online often gives us a false sense of security. It's easy to find information, but finding and evaluating are very different skills. News consumers used to have an advantage that we don't really have today. In the print environment, news was written by professional writers and edited by professional editors. Information was often much more carefully vetted. Much of the information we consume today is the work of amateurs, often anonymous amateurs. And the information they produce is often of poor quality and often it's just plain wrong. Those professional writers and editors who vetted so much information in the past are often not there in the online environment to ensure we get good information. It's kind of like the referees have left the field while the game is still going on, and it's up to us to referee the game for ourselves. There are many excellent professional news sources online. Many magazines and newspapers have tremendously useful websites. But however, these days, many of us tend to get a lot of our news from social media. And that is leading to the spread of a lot of false information. So that's what we will be talking about today, learning how to better evaluate online information. I hope this spurs some questions in your mind, and I think we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So a lot of the information we find online today that we might call fake news isn't really news at all. It's information we find on various social media platforms. It comes to us in the form of memes, blog posts, comments section on media posts, fake news websites, and sometimes fake social media accounts built by trolls. Because of this, we very often find low-grade and just plain false information. The producers of this information are almost always anonymous, and they almost never suffer any consequences when they're wrong, and they are quite often wrong. Dictionary.com added the term fake news to its online dictionary in 2017. Their definition shown here alludes to the concept of clickbait. News and advertising have always been linked, but clickbait is a problem because the producers of clickbait only really care about clicks. Page views, that will mean more advertising revenue for them. And the best way to get clicks is to publish wild, outrageous, outlandish headlines, stories, and photos. Research shows us that the more outrageous online material is, the more clicks and views it will receive. Great for advertisers, not so great for those of us who just want to know what's really going on in the world. Information pollution is a term that's growing in use these days to describe the bad information we find on the web. Just as the Industrial Revolution that began in England and the United States in the late 18th century brought environmental pollution, the information revolution brought about by the advent of the internet has brought us information pollution. Digital literacy. This is what we want to strive for, and here's a good definition of the term from the American Library Association. The ability to use information and communication technologies to find, evaluate, create, and communicate information, requiring both cognitive and technical skills. So from this, we understand that being digitally literate has two components: the ability to use technology and the cognitive ability to evaluate information. Most students today are quite proficient end users of computer technology. As we've mentioned already, finding info is pretty easy. It's the information evaluation part that many students and many Americans in general are having some issues with. And before we launch into a list of bad information formats on the web, you might be asking yourself, Why does it matter? What's the potential negative impact of millions of Americans consuming and believing false information and fake news? To answer those questions, I would point to two studies conducted by the Stanford History Education Group. To get a better idea of students' online information skills, the Stanford History Education Group did a groundbreaking study in 2016. They assessed over 8,000 students across the US. The students ranged in age from middle schoolers through college. The researchers were very concerned with what they found. The vast majority of students had difficulty in separating fact from fiction. Stanford conducted a similar study again in 2019 and recorded very similar findings. This quote is from the executive summary of their 2019 study, and I think it underlines the importance of information evaluation skills. A polluted information supply imperils our nation's civic health. So these are the stakes. We're not talking about simply winning an argument or having bragging rights over your friends and family. A free-flowing supply of accurate news and information is vital to the continued health of our democracy. Democracy depends upon a well-informed citizenry. If we don't really know what problems our country is facing, we won't find the right solutions. Bad information leads to bad decisions. That's why information evaluation matters so much. Fake news has always been with us, as this story from 1897 shows. You may well be familiar with the story about the false report of Mark Twain's death and how he famously replied when asked about the obituary that, quote, "The rumors of my death have been greatly exaggerated," end quote. While this story is often cited as a cautionary tale about the importance of fact-checking, it is also, ironically, full of misinformation. The fact is that no newspaper wrongly reported that Mark Twain had died in 1897, although a rumor did start to circulate around London that Twain was gravely ill. This was due to the details being muddled after Twain told one reporter that he was visiting his sick cousin while he was in London. When journalist Frank Marshall White contacted Twain for a comment on his health, Twain quipped that he had heard stories that he was dead before explaining about his cousin's illness and concluding that, quote, "The report of my illness grew out of this illness. The report of my death was an exaggeration," end quote. So one of our most well-known historical warnings about fake news contains elements of fake news itself. This article on Politico.com also provides a great historical example of fake news for us. This article describes fake news that spread all through the southern states shortly after the U.S. entered World War II. Rumors spread from the Carolinas to Louisiana that the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, was secretly traveling through the South, meeting with Black women who were domestic workers in white homes and encouraging them to walk off with their jobs. Another track of rumors had it that when all the white men went off to war, all the Black men in the South were going to stage a huge race riot and take over all the southern states. In Charleston, South Carolina, rumor had it that African-American men were stockpiling ice picks. In Memphis, they were supposedly buying rifles from the Sears Roebuck catalog. There wasn't a single shred of evidence to support these rumors, but they spread like wildfire anyway. Shamefully, even a few regional southern newspapers printed these rumors. Most did not, a handful did. They didn't have a shred of evidence behind the stories they published. There was a sociologist at the University of North Carolina at this time named Howard Odom. He heard these rumors and decided to study them. He hired a team of researchers, and together they interviewed thousands of Southerners and cataloged the rumors in a book, which you can still buy today, titled Race and Rumors of Race, The American South in the Early 40s. He did this to shine a light on these malignant rumors. I think the big takeaway for us in this story is that fake news, disinformation, hate speech, many negative forms of communication tend to flourish and spread in stressful times. 1942 was certainly a stressful year. At that point, the US was losing the war in the Pacific. Hitler still had firm control over Europe, and our country was still trying to work its way out of the Great Depression. Fake news flourishes and spreads in stressful times. Just being aware of that can help us fight fake news. While it's always been with us, what's different and dangerous now about fake news is the sheer staggering volume of it and the speed at which it travels. Both of those facts are due, of course, to the internet. Here's the front cover of Odom's book on Amazon.com. The social psychologists Gordon W. Allport and Leo Postman once wrote that rumor is most frenzied when the public is expecting a momentous event to occur. Like the South in 1942, we're living in a time of demographic, social, and economic change. Change is stressful, and stress can lead to the creation and spread of fake news. In the effort to become more digitally literate, there are two more terms that are very important to understand: misinformation and disinformation. Disinformation is a subset of misinformation. The main difference between the two is intent. Misinformation is unintentional, accidental. Disinformation is intentional. Disinformation is much more pernicious because it is manipulative and deceptive. It is designed to deceive. Some information shared by the popular blogger who calls herself the Food Babe provides some good examples of misinformation. In one blog post, the Food Babe warned her readers that many beers have an additive that is also found in antifreeze. The chemical she refers to, propylene glycol, is found in antifreeze. The chemical beer makers use, though, is propylene glycol alginate. It's derived from kelp, seaweed. It's completely natural, 100% safe. Very similar names, very different chemicals. The Food Babe is not a nutritionist, nor is she a dietitian. She does not have any training in chemistry either. She certainly didn't want to misinform her readers. It makes her look bad when she spreads false information, but she just didn't have the background or the knowledge to share good information with her readers. This fake Twitter profile gives us a very good example of disinformation. It comes to us from spotthetroll.org, which is a website created by Clemson University. I urge you to take a look at spotthetroll.org. The site gives visitors the opportunity to view Twitter accounts and vote whether or not they think each account is authentic. The account featured here is not. When you visit the site and take the quiz, you can scroll down and see that, quote, Chloe is tweeting about a horse that died as a result of a chemical spill in Centerville, Louisiana. The chemical spill never happened, and this is a fake Twitter account. This fake account was created by the Russian Internet Research Agency. The Internet Research Agency is a Russian troll farm, and they are most definitely guilty of spreading disinformation. In fact, it's their entire reason to exist, to spread disinformation and to foment chaos, not just here in the US, but in democratic countries around the world. They're guilty of interfering in democratic elections in Western nations, trying to stir up all kinds of trouble online. They used the Ukraine as a test laboratory before applying the same methods to attacks on democratic societies in the West. Millions of Americans have interacted with phony profiles created by the Internet Research Agency, and they had no idea they were doing so. And a little piece of trivia for you. Our word disinformation comes from the Russian word dezinformatsiya, a term coined by none other than Joseph Stalin. Misinformation, the menace of memes. Many of us get information from memes these days, and memes bring us some unique information problems. Here's the famous or perhaps infamous red dress meme. I'm sure we've all seen this, multiple versions on the web. In this version, we see the guy representing a social media user having his head turned by false information accompanied by an interesting picture, which is often what we get with memes. Critical thinking, represented by the girlfriend, is appalled by the social media user's fascination with false information. Memes have a number of features that make them troublesome as information sources. For one thing, a wealth of research has shown us that adding a picture to a statement makes the statement more believable, even when the statement and the picture have nothing to do with each other. So memes can be very convincing. And that's troubling because quite often the information we find in memes is simply made up. Meme makers are almost always anonymous, so memes can be perfect vehicles for fake news and hate speech. No one really pays a price for creating and sharing them. Also, we tend to believe posts from our family and friends, and those are quite often the people who share memes with us. This can make memes even more believable, whether the information they contain deserves that credibility or not. And quite often, memes do not deserve the credibility we assign to them. This meme has been shared widely on various platforms since 2016. There's a lot of false information here, but I'll just mention a few points for the sake of time. One is the whites killed by whites and whites killed by blacks figures. They've been switched. According to the FBI, 81% of whites killed in this country are killed by other whites. Exactly the opposite of what this meme tells us. Also, African Americans only make up 13% of the total US population, so the blacks killed by police and whites killed by police figures are very deceptive as well. When we look at the bottom of the meme, we see that the source is listed as, quote, Crime Statistics Bureau San Francisco. Sounds very authoritative, right? Well, there is no such entity as the Crime Statistics Bureau San Francisco. It does not exist. The maker of this meme just added this false attribution to give it an undeserved sense of credibility. If you do a web search for Crime Statistics Bureau San Francisco, all you will find are images of this meme and fact-checking articles deconstructing it. Here's another intentionally misleading meme. The NRA did, in fact, ban guns from the floor of their convention the year this meme was circulated, but this meme does not explain why. Vice President Mike Pence was attending the convention that year, and the Secret Service asked NRA officials that they would ban guns for his safety, and the NRA agreed to do so. Just reading the meme, however, you would get the impression that the banning of guns from the convention floor that year was an act of hypocrisy, but that was really not the case. This example is certainly not as dark and pernicious as the previous example, but once again, this is an example of disinformation, information created and circulated with the intent to manipulate and deceive. Confirmation bias also presents information and evaluation problems for us. We could spend an entire semester studying the psychology of misinformation, and there are classes that do just that. And I don't want to oversimplify something that's really complicated, but many psychologists tell us that a key factor in the internet misinformation, disinformation phenomenon is the concept of confirmation bias. And confirmation bias basically means believing what we want to believe. Once we've formed a view on a subject, we really don't like to revisit the decision. We simply look for information that confirms what we already believe to be true. People love being right, and we really hate being wrong. Reversing course when contradictory information is presented to us can be very difficult. I think the third bullet point on this slide is very important. Confirmation bias can be found in anxious individuals. As with the fake news pandemic of 1942 article that we looked at, we again see anxiety playing a role in the spread of bad information and the tendency for many individuals to believe that bad information. So, in effect, confirmation bias can be a way to attempt to control anxiety. All of us are prone to confirmation bias, and we need to be aware of its pitfalls. Okay, so what can we do about all of this deceptive information? How do we separate fact from fiction? We're going to spend the rest of the time that we've got today talking about solutions to these problems. And here's a list with some good advice: how to recognize a fake news story. First of all, read past the headline. Headlines today are often very clickbaitish. They're often there more to garner clicks than to really describe the contents of the story. Check the news outlet that published the story. It's important, but not the be-all end-all. Even mediocre news outlets get it right sometimes, but knowing where the story comes from is important. Check the date and time of publication. Sometimes the story you're reading might be outdated. Who's the author? Often you can't tell. Very often that's the case if you're getting news from social media. Look at the links and sources. A well-written news story will have links either in the text of the story or at the bottom of the story for you to follow and investigate for yourself. This is called lateral reading, and we'll talk a lot more about this in just a moment. Look for questionable quotes and photos. Photos that don't belong with the stories they accompany is a very common feature of disinformation, and we see that a lot on the web. Beware of confirmation bias. We're all prone to it. Being aware of that's the first step to addressing the problem. Search if other news outlets are reporting on the story. If it's an important story and you can only find one source reporting on it, that should raise some red flags for you. And think before you share. All good recommendations to live by. Ethical standards of journalism. Unlike information we get from fake news, information pollution, amateur writings on the web, professional journalists are beholden to a set of principles in their work. I learned these principles as a high school journalism student. Unfortunately, fewer and fewer high school students study journalism today, and one result of that is that fewer and fewer people understand how journalism and journalists work and the role of the news media in a free society in general. Here are the most important of those principles: accuracy, independence, impartiality, and integrity. More standards: harm minimization, engagement, and accountability. All very important standards for professional journalists to follow. It's important, I think, for students to realize too that large newspaper staffs have a staff member called an ombudsman. The ombudsman is responsible for checking the work of their reporters and making sure that reporting is done ethically and accurately. Not something you're going to find on Facebook. The Sift method for news analysis. This is the kind of the latest, greatest thing in infolit education. This comes to us from digital learning expert at the University of Washington, Mike Caulfield. This method reflects the way that fact checkers work. So when you employ this method in your news analysis, you will be thinking and working like a fact checker. S is for stop. When you land on a web page for the first time, before you share or read the whole article, stop. Do you know what the reputation of the website is? Do you know what the reputation of the claim the writer is making is? If not, use the other moves to get a better idea of what you're looking at. I for investigate. Do some web searches so you can figure out what you're reading before you get very far with the article or the post. Figure out where the media came from. If you're watching a video on the nutritional importance of milk and you find out the video was produced by the Dairy Council, that's something you would want to know. It's important to understand the agenda behind the production and dissemination of media. F is for find better coverage. If you're watching that video from the Dairy Council on the nutritional value of milk, you may want to stop watching that and do a search to see what nutritionists say about the subject. T is for trace claims and quotes to their original context. A lot of the information we find on the internet has been stripped of its original context. In these cases, trace the claim, quote, or media back to the source so you can see it in its original context and get a source that the version you saw was accurately presented. When they are investigating a story online, fact checkers practice lateral reading. Rather than sticking with just one source, they click away from that article and see what other news outlets are reporting on that story. This is how they work, and this is how the experts advise us to investigate information that we find on the web. Lateral reading will enable you to have a much more well-rounded understanding of any news story you might be investigating. So read articles from a number of different sources on the subject. Really important. Another tool at our disposal is the understanding of logical fallacies. This is a bust of the Greek philosopher Aristotle. He was the first thinker to formally study logic. You may or may not have a class in your academic career that provides an opportunity for you to study logical fallacies. If you don't have a class that discusses them, I urge you to learn about them on your own. They are invaluable tools. Once you study them a bit, you can easily spot logical fallacies in all kinds of information you encounter. And here are two common logical fallacies on this slide, courtesy of the Purdue OWL website. The ad hominem fallacy. This is an attack on the character of a person rather than their opinions or arguments. In this example, Greenpeace's strategies aren't effective because they're all dirty, lazy hippies. The circular argument fallacy. This restates the argument rather than actually proving it. An example here is John Doe is a good communicator because he speaks effectively. The argument winds up exactly where it started, which makes it a logical fallacy. Fact checkers offer us great assistance in our efforts to evaluate information. Factcheck.org is great for checking the veracity of political stories, as is politifact.com. You may have seen articles from PolitiFact. They're famous for their truthometer. They take public statements from public officials and politicians, research them, and then assign those statements a spot on the truthometer. OpenSecrets.org is a really useful site that I think a lot of people don't know about. I wish it would get more web traffic than it does, but it's a very useful site because it tracks the money in politics. If you've ever wondered who the major donors are for a given candidate, this site has that info for you. It can be very expensive to run for political office in the US, so tracking the money can be very important. Open Secrets also tracks lobbying groups. Also a very important function that they provide for us. This article on factcheck.org addresses the terrible wildfires Australia suffered in 2019. Climatologists blamed the fires largely on climate change. Some others, though, said that arsonists were responsible for the fires. You all have probably heard some people say, who fact checks the fact checkers? And the answer to that question is, we can all fact check the fact checkers. That's the whole point. Their work is transparent and traceable. These are the sources at the bottom of the page of this fact-checking article on the sources of the Australian wildfires. There are more links to follow in the body of the story. I counted more than 20 links, 20 sources for this article. It takes some time to follow the links and to read the information the fact-checking article is based on, but we all have the opportunity to do so if we choose to. Many issues we face today are complicated. There really are no shortcuts. If we want to understand the complicated issues facing us, we really have to put in the time to read extensively from a wide variety of resources. And tracking down these links provides us a great example of the practice of lateral reading. We also have other allies on the web in our efforts to fight fake news. The Associated Press website publishes a feature called Not Real News. It's a weekly roundup published every Friday of fake news stories and doctored photos that were widely shared that week on social media. Founded in 1846, the Associated Press is one of the most trusted news agencies in the world. Its members are newspapers and broadcasters from around the country. Their smartphone app is very useful. I highly recommend it. You can download it for free. Here's a screenshot from the app from my phone displaying 1 week's edition of Not Real News. I've been keeping up with Not Real News for a few years now, and there's never been a Friday when there was a shortage of fake news for the AP to report on. The Sift, it's a weekly newsletter published by the News Literacy Project, and there's a URL for you here at newslit.org. Like the Associated Press, it publishes a weekly rundown of fake and misleading news stories from all over the web. This site is especially useful for teachers because it features potential classroom discussion questions and learning activities that go along with the debunking of fake news. This is from the newsletter back in April of 2020. This post on Facebook incorrectly claimed people should wear their masks differently depending on whether or not they were sick. White side out when you're not sick, colored side out if you are sick. Completely false, but this meme was widely shared on Twitter and Facebook. Quite tragically, the COVID pandemic has provided many examples of the potentially high costs of believing fake news and false information that we find on the web. One final recommendation, and this is a really great one, Checkology.org, also from the News Literacy Project. This is great for students, even better for educators. Checkology contains dozens of lessons on recognizing fake news. It's a product of the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington. You can register for free access to lessons on many subjects like understanding bias, conspirational thinking, misinformation, how quality journalism is produced, arguments and evidence, the First Amendment, and many more topics related to news and information evaluation. It also features a workshop that gives students the chance to take on the role of a news editor and to make some news editing decisions for themselves. So a quick summary of some of the things we talked about. Be skeptical of information that you find on social media. Strive to get your news from professional sources. Beware of confirmation bias in others and in yourself. Apply the Sift method to news analysis. Practice lateral reading. Learn to recognize logical fallacies. When in doubt, consult fact-checking sites. And take advantage of those allies out there like the Associated Press and the newslit.org folks who are there to help us find our way through this complicated internet information environment. So we've really just scratched the surface. There's a lot more to talk about. And if you'd like more information, just email me, stop by the Northwest Library to chat. I would love to talk to you about it. There are people earning degrees in this field now. It's usually called new media literacies. So it's a lot to look at, a lot of information, and it's a really important topic. So if I can help you learn more about it, I'm happy to do so. Let's thank you for your time and attention. And I think we've got time if anybody's got a question, any more information that I can provide for you. I'm here if you've got questions for me. Maybe I answer every question that anyone's ever had about fake news.
My question is really about bias.
I'm sorry, I can just barely hear you.
Sorry. My question is really about bias.
Okay.
Because if someone's biased, they probably want to change their opinion. How do you work with that?
I couldn't completely hear you, but it was something about how you change the mind of someone who's biased, or how you change someone's opinion when they have a bias. It's difficult. It's very difficult, and especially kind of in like the times we're living in now, we're so politically divided, and people take a very tribal approach to news and information. And so it can be tough. It can be tough to show people, and we all have, people, our extended families or friends, maybe old friends we went to school with years ago, people we don't encounter every day, but that we know that they believe some things that just don't really make sense, that don't really add up. And it's frustrating because you would like them to be more logical in their approach, but I think the only thing that you can really do is just present facts to people. And so often, what happens these days when we try to talk about these things, it turns into name calling really quickly. It turns into personal attacks very fast. And I don't think that gets anybody anywhere. So I think when we debate with people who are maybe not looking at these things too rationally, I try to kind of keep the temperature down. Don't call them names. Don't Don't make people feel foolish or stupid if they don't think what you think. Maybe just present facts when you can, just in a very dispassionate way, and then just leave it with them. Like the slide, the meme with the fake, murder numbers. If you're presented with that, you could just say, well, you know what, I've got information here from the FBI, and the FBI actually does, the FBI doesn't make anonymous memes. They do actually compile these statistics, and the FBI tells us that those numbers are wrong, and there are people at the FBI who will sign off on that and stake their reputations to that information. So I think they're more believable. And the fact that so much of the bad information is anonymous should tell people, well, it's easy to spread bad information when you don't suffer any consequences. If you're a reporter and you really mess up, you get in trouble. If you do it enough times, you're not going to be a reporter anymore. But anybody can make up false information in a meme and just put it out there and escape any kind of accountability. So I just tell people, I like my information to come from professionals. I like people to be accountable for the information they share. And a lot of the bad information that's out there is from anonymous individuals who are obviously unaccountable. So I don't know if you can really change people's minds, but the best we can do is just talk to them calmly and just present them with facts. And if they're going to change their minds at some point, they will. And I know people who have, who used to believe some things that really didn't make sense, and to their credit, they took in some better information and they said, yeah, I was wrong about that, and I've changed my mind. And that's a real sign of maturity, and it's rare. It's really rare these days. But I think that's the best thing we can do, is just present people calmly and dispassionately, just present people with facts. I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of the approach I take. Yes, Matthew, you had something at your hand?
Yeah, I was just trying to. No, I can't get the chat to come up. But somebody, Eva had a follow-up in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I've got the transcript running at the same time, and
let's see. Experiences with speaking to the underlying anxieties. Yes, I think probably, when I present these classes, I've been doing fake news classes for 6 or 7 years now. And sometimes those will come up in class, and also people that I know, people that I used to go to school with, who believe a lot of fake news and false information, and you can kind of hear the anxiety kind of below audible level, what the things that they fear. And I just kind of take that approach of just presenting facts, and that's all we can really do, is just present our friends and family and classmate with facts. And hopefully they will track that down for themselves, and consume some better information. Maybe they won't. I mean, some people never will. We had people in downtown Dallas this week who thought that John F. Kennedy Jr. was going to present himself, though he died in a plane crash in 1999, that somehow he was going to present himself to this crowd in Dallas, just because one online influencer said that was going to happen. And hundreds of people traveled to Dallas expecting John F. Kennedy Jr. to magically appear. So
some of them were expecting JFK to show up too.
Yes, and his dad was also going to be there, who would be 107, I think. He was born in 1917 or something. So somehow, if JFK were still with us, he'd be 107 now, I guess. But he was going to show up with JFK Jr., and they were going to, do something monumental.
And Robin Williams was apparently in the crowd as well, wearing a rubber mask.
Yeah, so I think that gets to the confirmation bias aspect. It's like people who believe those things believe them because they really, really want to believe them. There's not any good logical reason for them to believe those things. There's no fact-based reasoning to believe those things. It's kind of it has kind of a club aspect to it. It's like joining some, secret club, and there's some satisfaction that comes from that, thinking that, oh, I have some secret knowledge that most people don't have. I've got some inside track to the truth, and that makes me special and different. And I think there are a whole lot of interesting psychological aspects to that. But if you honestly believe that John F. Kennedy Jr. and JFK were going to appear in downtown Dallas earlier this week, I don't know how much any good reporting or any good information is really going to help, because that's really, kind of a choice. But some of those people do turn around. I've read, articles about people who say, wow, I used to be kind of part of this group, and I finally realized it didn't make any sense. And I disavow my former affiliation with people who believe these kinds of things. So it can happen, but I think all we can do from the outside is just, when asked or when you have the possibility, just present people with facts, and don't call them names. Don't try to make them feel foolish. Just kind of quietly feed them a steady diet of facts. If they look to you for some kind of confirmation, or if they need something from you, just give them the facts. I think that's about the best that we can really do. And it is a problem that we didn't have so much back in the print days. We had fewer sources. People kind of trusted authority a little bit more in those days. So this is it's an internet era problem that we're having to deal with, and it's a big issue in education now. I know I've done fake news classes for instructors in all kinds of disciplines, because it comes up in all kinds of classes, and professors are dealing with it all the time. So it's something that we're all trying to kind of get our arms around. Let's see, it's like Matthew's got something typing away here.
No, I'm done.
Okay. So I hope that's a little bit helpful. I wish there was some magic potion, some magic answer we had for people who believe fake news and false information. I do think the confirmation bias piece of it is really big, and I think the tribalism is very big. It's people want to belong to groups. We want to feel part of something bigger than ourselves, and a lot of these groups give people that confirmation, that sense of belonging. And so they might go along with some of this stuff, even if they don't really believe it, just because it's like, hey, that's my group. I'm not going to bash them because that's kind of my tribe, and I'm going to hang with them, no matter what. So it's a tough problem, and that's why, like the Stanford history education folks, the Newslit folks, the News Literacy Project people. I mean, that's why we're all kind of wrestling with this, and hopefully, we'll have some better ideas going forward. But I think those are the best approaches we can take for now. But it's a lot to study in the field. It touches on a lot of different disciplines. So it's a big problem, and something we're going to have to keep working on for the foreseeable future.
Any further questions?
It's like Eva, I think I see your microphone lighting up there, but okay. Okay. Well, I hope that this has been helpful for you. I hope it's given you some things to think about. Provided some good resources on the web for you to check out. The AP News, the Not Real News, is a really interesting read every Friday. The newslit.org people have a lot of great stuff. So there are some lights shining out there in the darkness for us. We've got some allies to kind of help us try to get good information to people. So there are some things to be optimistic about. But anytime I can help with this, let me know. It's something I care a lot about. I think it's really important. And I think in case y'all missed it, back up at the top of the chat at 2:06 p.m., I posted a link to the evaluation forum. So if you got a few minutes, I know the Trinity River folks would love to have your feedback, and I'd like to hear what you thought about this too. It helps me make better presentations. So if you got a minute to share some feedback, we'd love to hear what you think. There we go. Tracy just popped it in there again. Okay. All right. Anything else I can do for you today? Any more information I can share? Football predictions, stock tips. Now I'm terrible at the stock market. I'd probably be better at football predictions. Probably be a better field for me than stock picks. But anything else I can help you with today? Any more questions?
Going once, going twice.
Guess we're good. Okay. All right, guys. Well, it was very enjoyable talking to you today. I hope I gave you some things to think about. Hope to take a look at those resources we talked about. If you've got more questions about fake news, if I can help you in any way, just email me, just james.baxter@tccd.edu. I'll be happy to talk with you.
Thank you, James, and thank all of you for attending today's session.